At the Nocturnists, we are careful to ensure that all stories comply with healthcare privacy laws. Details may have been changed to ensure patient confidentiality. All views expressed are those of the person speaking and not their employer.
Welcome to the Nocturnists, Post-Roe America. I'm Allie Block. Over the course of this series, we've covered what's changed in the abortion landscape since the Dobbs decision. In some ways, we've been looking backwards, taking stock. But for this last episode, we want to look at what's happening right now. And as we said at the beginning of the series, there isn't one single unified voice when it comes to abortion advocacy. It's a tapestry of different ideas, hard work, and pie-in-the-sky gambits. So today we're bringing you 3 stories of people in the world of abortion access that are taking different approaches to the care they offer. In the first, we meet those behind what's probably the largest shift in reproductive care since Dobbs, and what might constitute the foreseeable future of abortion access in red states: medication abortion via telehealth.
Call for extension 4. To accept, press 1. To send the voicemail.
Hi, this is the hotline doctor. Can I help you?
Hi, yeah, I was hoping,
This is Linda Prine, one of the volunteers at the Miscarriage and Abortion Hotline. She was also one of the founders of the hotline back in 2019.
You're fine. You're really fine. You're not pregnant anymore. You don't need an ultrasound. You're going to have a period that'll be a little extra heavy. This is definitely not dangerous in any way, and it's definitely not a continuing pregnancy because
Linda's one of 60 volunteers that take shifts answering phones, text messages, and emails from people who are primarily in the process of self-managing their medication abortions.
wow. Okay.
Okay.
Wow, okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, you hang in there. Take care and call us back if you have any questions as you're going through the process.
So the hotline was started because abortion access has, historically been horrible.
This is April Lockley, medical director of the hotline, which became a crucial resource during the pandemic, when more people were managing their abortions at home. But demand for medication abortions unsurprisingly shot way up after Dobbs, especially in states where access has become restricted.
I would say on an average day, we talk to anywhere from 50 to 70 people, and that's either text messaging or phone calls. Sometimes the questions are very brief and can be answered in 20 seconds or a one-line text response, and other times the calls are 20, 30 minutes, or we're texting with people for days or weeks while they're going through the abortion process. And so, especially now, after the Dobbs decision, people are just really confused about if they can have an abortion, where they can access an abortion, how they can get medication abortion pills. So we reassure people about that and about the safety of the medications. So it's a lot of managing that anxiety after people have had an abortion has been a big theme that we're seeing, especially after the Dobbs decision. And people are just very understandably nervous about being pregnant when they don't want to be pregnant.
If there was a silver lining to be found from the pandemic, it was that it normalized telemedicine for abortion care. When abortion clinics were deemed non-essential care, the FDA allowed for abortion medication to be prescribed remotely and for the pills to either be picked up at the clinic without a visit or mailed. We learned that all the stuff we were making patients do beforehand, clinic visits, blood tests, ultrasounds, wasn't actually necessary, and that remote medication abortions are totally safe. Now, telehealth medical abortions are fast becoming the norm in the post-Roe landscape.
We went from being physicians to being shipping clerks. First, I had to learn how to use this shipping equipment, like label makers and buying the right envelopes. And, I used to show up at the post office with these gigantic bags like I was Santa Claus. And my post office never asked what I was doing. You could shake my bag and say, this is a weird load of stuff.
This is one of the physicians who works with Aid Access. She requested to stay anonymous, so we'll call her Kate.
What really got me involved to become a provider across state lines is I was the medical director of a clinic in Alabama, in Montgomery, Alabama. That, of course, closed down in June 2022, the day of the Dobbs decision, because of laws that were already on the books. And I came north to a state where we had extensive rights and access. And because of a flight away, I left people with no access, in complete chaos, with their health and their well-being in jeopardy, all because of some state lines. And that's when the whole idea of providing telemedicine abortion provision across state lines came to mind.
With a handful of other physicians, she began shipping out abortion medications to people in restricted states, entering into a kind of legal gray zone.
I think that what motivated us was, where most of us are a little bit later in our careers. If we lost our license, we were like, it would be done soon anyway. So I think that was part of the motivation. Most of us are older. And if we knock a few years off of our careers, it's probably okay.
But to make this less of a fly-by-night operation and hopefully bring younger physicians into the fold, they knew they'd have to minimize their legal exposure.
So I immediately started working with my state legislatures I didn't know what it was called. It didn't have a name at the time, to try to pass a shield law.
Overall, the idea of a shield law is to prevent criminalization from outside states of abortion care in the state in question.
This is Jiana Menendez, a family medicine doctor based in New York, who worked on passing shield law legislation there and now plays a large role in reproductive advocacy in the state.
And so the first stage of shield laws that started kind of immediately after Dobbs, I think Connecticut was the first to pass a shield law, really dealt with people traveling to those states to access abortion care. Fundamentally, it's not illegal to do that. And like the way our Constitution is designed, you follow the law of the land of the state that you're in. So it should not be illegal to travel to Connecticut to get abortion care.
States that have restricted abortion access are unsurprisingly trying to pass laws that circumvent this legality. Texas, for instance, is trying to make it illegal to use their highways to leave the state to access abortion care.
Concerns about these types of creative legislation from anti-abortion politicians made a lot of states put into effect laws reaffirming that it's legal to do that and putting protections in place saying very explicitly, if another state tries to subpoena records from our state or tries to get the cooperation of our police departments, that we're not going to cooperate. We're going to protect both the patients and providers that are doing that work. And those are preemptive and they're important, but the real work over the last year has been about getting shield laws in place for telemedicine, which has been the new frontier of abortion care. For most medical legal reasons, telemedicine occurs in this place where the patient resides. So what these shield laws are doing, what they do is they redefine abortion care as occurring in the place where the provider is. And so a New York doctor could sit in their office in New York and see a patient from Texas, but that care has been defined as being in New York. They could see them for a telemedicine abortion assessment, prescribe them pills while in New York, and then send the pills to, say, for example, Texas. Now, the reason they're shield laws is because Texas would view that as illegal. Texas law would say that you're practicing medicine in Texas because the patient is residing in Texas. But New York law now says, no, you're practicing medicine in New York, and there's nothing wrong with that.
And so when Kate began searching for a way to help her patients in Alabama from the northern state where she now lived, she hit on the idea of the shield law.
It helped that I had a good friend who was a state senator. And so I immediately contacted her, and I told her about how frantic I was, how worried I was about my patients and the women in Alabama, and what can we do about it in this state? There wasn't another state that had it, that didn't exist. But then as we started to say, could this be possible? Could a state go against another state's laws? And it seemed a little crazy, but then Massachusetts was the first state that passed the shield law. And so we got in touch with the people who helped drafted that to see if we could draft something in my state. And in fact, that's exactly what we did. And it passed overwhelmingly in both the state and the House and then passed by the governor. Because how could you not?
Jiana then brought a similar law to the New York State legislature.
But with the shield laws, we really had to convince the legislature that this was safe, that we were doing the right thing. It was a beast to get people on the same page and like talk through the constitutional law and like look at it and reword the language and make sure it was what we wanted. And we got it through the Senate pretty quickly. And then we stalled in the House for a long time.
The bill ended up being assigned to the Codes and Insurance Committee rather than the Health Committee. This meant a lot of rewrites to make sure that the insurance industry didn't become exposed by the new law.
It took a lot of work to really get that language where we needed it. And then it didn't match the Senate language anymore. So then we had to get it past the Senate again.
Eventually, the law was passed. The governor was actually so proud of the legislation that she called a special session to push it through. There's a photo of the governor signing the bill with Linda Prine standing behind her. Jiana was supposed to be there too, but she had clinic patients scheduled that day. Now there are 15 states with some form of shield laws on the books, but that doesn't mean that medication abortions by telemedicine are protected.
So they can't come and get us in our states, but if we go to Texas and we get pulled over for a traffic violation and they find out there's, some warrant, we could go to jail, and then our states can't come and get us. Again, this is theoretically, it's a little bit of fear-mongering. So far, that hasn't happened. We don't know if it could happen. We don't know.
Not only that, but the law itself hasn't been tested in the courts.
We always point to each other saying, I hope it's you. We're kind of surprised nothing has happened yet, to be honest. But nothing has. But, eventually it will. This is essential healthcare. What is known is that no matter if abortions are legal or illegal in a country, it doesn't change the rate of abortions. It just changes where they happen, the safety of them. In fact, there's been an increase in abortion in the formal healthcare system, which doesn't even account for us. And I think that's because abortion clinics have closed in these states, which has decreased the access to contraception.
Medication abortions are a great solution for a lot of people, especially those early in their pregnancies. But there are still many, many people who will need procedural or in-clinic abortions. Which brings us to our second story. Who makes sure that these types of abortions can be available to all who need them?
So my name is Oriaku Njoku. I use she and they pronouns. Love for folks to mix them up. And I am the executive director of the National Network of Abortion Funds. Abortion funds are like people's first call when they need support navigating the barriers to abortion care.
Abortion funds do everything from helping people to pay for their abortions to providing transportation, childcare, translation services, doula services, or even places to stay for people who have to travel to get an abortion. NNAF, the organization that Oriaku directs, is an umbrella organization that supports over 100 abortion funds across the country.
We've essentially always been like this anchor to ensure the needs of our membership are being met in order to adequately meet the needs of their communities. And, what that has looked like has evolved over time, but some of it is like, let's take a look at this policy. Does this make sense for the conditions that we're in right now? It's like, how do you navigate conflict? How do you ground yourself and find ways to pause, find ways to pace yourself differently?
Oriaku says this holistic approach to reproductive rights work has just always made sense to her. Part of that is from how she entered the field in the first place, more than 10 years ago. After just having been fired from a job at Bloomingdale's, a friend invited her to a reproductive justice training. She attended with no expectations or prior knowledge, beyond that she'd be provided breakfast and lunch.
So I went to this training, and that's where I first heard about what reproductive justice is, which is the human right to bodily autonomy, to choose to be a parent, not to be a parent, and to raise your kids and have your families live in safe and sustainable communities. moved away from this choice binary where in the reproductive health and rights movement, where you always think about like the right to choose. This shifted from that and said that like each person has a myriad of things that influence their decision-making process every day. And that can be the environment, the economy, access to a living or thriving wage, access to information around health. I mean, your race, your gender, ethnicity, all of these things play into why people make the decisions they make. And so for me, as like a Black, queer, first generation, Nigerian American, fat, Southern person, it was like, oh, there's a place where all of these things has a home. All of these things can be treated with dignity and respect. I don't have to silo myself anymore because there's actually a place for all of them that's welcomed and received with joy. And so as soon as I did that training, I'm like, oh, I got to find something in this movement. I don't know what, I don't care. Like, I got to find something.
Not too long after that, an opportunity presented itself.
I'd gotten a job by that point and was working at a massage place, answering phones as a lifestyle consultant, and saw that there was a job opening at an abortion clinic in North Buckhead, Atlanta. And, you know, if you don't like really know about the Atlanta area, Buckhead is like the Beverly Hills of the South. Like, it's really bougie. There's the shops and all the things. And I'm like, I talk to rich white women every single day. Like, this is a transferable skill that I could go at an abortion clinic in North Buckhead and talk to folks. That's where I was at. When I got to my first clinic day, the only white person in the clinic was our clinic administrator. Everyone else was a person of color. The people who came to get their abortions, their escort, everyone. And it wasn't just from Buckhead or just from Atlanta. These were folks coming from states surrounding Georgia and beyond. And my mind was blown. I was like, what is actually happening right now? Why are people traveling from like Kentucky, Ohio, just to get abortion care?
This was 2014, a few years after a flurry of anti-abortion legislation had caused a number of clinics to shut down in the South. So there were an increasing number of people forced to travel for abortion access. And Oriaku just happened to be working at one of the major resources in the region. She and two of her coworkers started brainstorming ways to better meet the need they were seeing every day at the clinic.
I was like, y'all, we got to do something to show up for our communities in a better way, because all of this back and forth and navigating through these various barriers to get abortions, this actually doesn't make sense. And so we're like, let's start an abortion fund. Like, why not?
At the time, there weren't any abortion funds in their region, so they started looking into other abortion funds around the country for ideas. Soon after, they founded Access Reproductive Care Southeast.
Looking back on it, I'm like, what in the world? I remember we didn't even have like the direct deposit set up in our bank account. So I remember getting the check of our first grant in the mail and crying, and then going to the bank and they're like, we need a manager. I promise it's not a scam. Like, this is from a legit funder. Here you go. We're putting it into our organizational bank account.
Fast forward almost a decade, and the day after the Dobbs leak, Oriaku was offered the job as executive director for the National Network of Abortion Funds.
I said yes. And then my last day at ARC Southeast was June 30th. The Dobbs decision came in June 24th. I remember that day folks messaging me and being like, should we come back to work? I was like, you have to prioritize your rest. This is literally just the beginning of this work. I knew that this was not like the end of a thing, but a beginning of a new era in our movement.
And since then, that's what Oriaku's been working towards. The way they see it, their job is first and foremost about imagining a new kind of future, leading a culture shift around how abortion care in the U.S. gets done. And abortion funds have become infinitely more important since Dobbs. This is because of the money needed for all the additional travel, time off work, transportation, and lodging that's required for people seeking abortions outside of restricted states. In fact, if you ask anyone deep into this work where people should donate their money, they'll almost certainly say, donate to abortion funds.
There's no way that we can continue to move in this reactionary way without pausing to acknowledge that like harm has been done. People are coming from a traumatized place. People are afraid. So only focusing on the legality of abortion never guaranteed accessibility. It never guaranteed availability. And it sure didn't do anything to make sure that the way that we talk about abortion in our culture is something that is acceptable. What I keep going back to personally is that my therapist, thanks girl for showing up for me weekly, but my therapist, she's the one who let me know that anxiety is the inability to deal with uncertainty. And when she said that to me, I was like, oh baby, I play to win. Like, I will not continue to move into this place where I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know how to move. I'm just stuck in this like analysis paralysis. And I'm like, no, I'm deeply committed to being able to deal with the uncertainty, which is effectively what happens every day, you know, in our movement.
That proactive attitude that Oriaku's talking about is at the heart of our third and final story. I want you to meet Meg Autry, an abortion provider at UCSF who looked at a Mississippi riverboat, one of those floating casinos you'll find down south, and thought she might be looking at the future of abortion access.
Because I'm so familiar with the South and the Mississippi River, I was constantly like, why can people gamble on the Mississippi River, but they can't gamble on the land?
And so it got her thinking, what was it about the water that made gambling legal?
One of my co-residents and I used to always have this joke of an idea that we would do pap smears on a sailboat in the bay. And like you could go and you would be on the sailboat and you would be in this beautiful space and get your pap smear and then maybe have a glass of wine and then come back.
But as the attacks on abortion access began to pile up in 2018, that joke began to seem like more of a good idea.
The idea at that point was seeing if you could run a reproductive health or abortion clinic on the Mississippi River. I really need to explore if this is a possibility. So we didn't have a name, we didn't have anything. We're just like, is this feasible? This is a group all trying to figure out innovative, pie in the sky, out there ideas to combat what was going on, you know, nationally.
So she teamed up with a colleague at UCSF, found a lawyer, and got to work.
Ultimately, the lawyers concluded that in order to provide reproductive health care in the Mississippi River, essentially you can only be off the coast of Illinois and Minnesota. And so that wasn't really going to help the people that we thought needed help. And we started having these conversations like, okay, it's not legal in the Mississippi, but maybe it could be legal in federal waters in the Gulf Coast. And wow, look at the Gulf Coast. Every single state on the Gulf Coast is restricted.
Something like this has actually been pulled off before. In 1999, the Dutch physician Rebecca Gompertz founded the organization Women on Waves, which provided non-surgical abortions on a boat in international waters, along with all sorts of other reproductive health services. The organization would pull into harbor in a restrictive nation, like Ireland, take aboard women seeking care, and travel 20 kilometers offshore. In these neutral waters, the law that governed the nation in which the boat was constructed, which in this case was the Netherlands, where medical abortions were legal, was the law that could be enforced. Women on Waves still exist today, and Dr. Gompertz went on to found Aid Access, which Kate mentioned earlier.
I did not get my idea from Rebecca Gompertz, from Women on Waves, but once I had told my idea to people, they're like, you need to talk to Rebecca Gompertz. And so I did. And she's this amazing individual and a pioneer. And one of the things she said was, get a faster boat. That's what I did. And it has to be different because we're actually doing surgical terminations. So we have to have a boat that's big enough to accommodate a helicopter for emergencies. So that's about at least 42 meters.
Building a 42-meter-long boat, which, by the way, is a big boat, and outfitting it to be capable of functioning as a surgical abortion clinic was obviously going to be a heavy logistical lift. But the reality of losing abortion access in the vast majority of the South to Meg was a problem worthy of an ambitious solution.
The whole point of being in the Gulf is to help people who cannot afford to get to clinics on the land. And those are mostly poor people, people of color, people living in the southernmost part of these states. And so if you're in Brownsville, Texas, to get to Albuquerque, New Mexico, at the minimum is going to take you 2 days. And it's around, ultimately we decided like $3,000. But even if it's paid, it's still 2 days away from your family or your job. And if you can't afford that, either monetarily or personally, then it's not an option for you.
And so one of the first things they did was to see who, if anyone, would be interested in an abortion on a boat if that were ever to become a possibility. So they teamed up with TexPEP, a project within the University of Texas, and included a question in a national study that was already ongoing. What they found was that 50% of respondents would get an abortion on a boat if that was the closest option. And this was pre-Dobbs. After Dobbs, they ran another study, this time with only respondents from Texas, and found that 80% of respondents would be open to the idea.
We decided we have to be ready to go. We need to be ready to go public when the Dobbs decision comes down. So we hired a ship consultant. We hired an operations person who has a background in architecture. We came up with a name. It's called Prowess, PRROWESS, Protecting Reproductive Rights of Women Endangered by State Statutes. We met monthly. We incorporated. We established a 501c3.
They basically got themselves to the point where they could announce their intent to build this floating clinic and start the process of fundraising.
So the response was incredible, both from small donors, from the legal, the maritime, and the medical community. I mean, I'm not a development person, but our development person said, this is unprecedented that you're being contacted by foundations instead of you contacting them.
But then some reality sunk in. As much as foundations wanted to get involved, many were restricted from actually helping to build the floating clinic. They could support its upkeep once it was operational, but they couldn't be the ones to finance its construction. Not only that, there were some legal details that they hadn't foreseen.
So they believe it has to be Jones Act compliant, which means it has to have been built in the U.S., and then it needs to have a home port in the U.S. and be flagged in a state that's not restricted. And then you have to think about how much time you can be at sea without refueling and replenishing supplies and things like that. And so we think we can serve on average around 4,000 patients a year. And that's accommodating for, the rough seas. So we wouldn't be out there for at least 2 months probably. But when we were out there, we'd probably be out there 14 days straight. So essentially being operational 7 days a week. So we believe buying a boat would take about 2 months, and then retrofitting it, so making it clinic worthy, would take about 3 months. So we think we could be operational in 6 months.
So that's where they are now. Still meeting monthly, still untangling the legal logistics, raising money. It's hard to say, even for Meg, whether this idea will ever become a reality.
I understand why it's a hard sell, but on the other hand, it's a commentary on where we are in this country, right? That we need to go to these lengths, and hopefully people understand that patients are willing to get on a boat to get an abortion because they can't get the care that they need and deserve in their own state. That's huge.
This kind of creative, out-of-left-field thinking, spurred by the Post-Roe America that we now live in, is a testament to how critical basic abortion rights are. But it's also a reminder that none of this is new. Abortion providers, advocates, and their patients have always faced barriers to providing and accessing this basic care, and they have and will continue to reimagine ways of meeting this basic human right. So this series has been a snapshot of an ongoing, dynamic story at a time of a seismic shift. Dobbs has offered a lens through which we can understand the much longer, much larger fight for bodily autonomy and reproductive justice in this country. Until everyone has the ability to choose the life they want for themselves and their families, and the access to resources to make that possible, the idea of a true pre- or post-era is theoretical at best. This is, and always has been, about so much more than abortion. I want to thank everyone who contributed to this series. Your voices have offered a rare and invaluable glimpse of where we are and where we might hope to go. Not everyone who we spoke to appeared in the episodes, but your perspectives were foundational in shaping the series. So thank you for your stories, and thank you for your work. And finally, on a personal note, I want to thank my fellow abortion providers again for sharing your perspectives. The process of collaborating on this series was meaningful to me in ways I didn't even know I needed. After years of working in the abortion world, and in the words of Nikki Zeit from the first episode, so often feeling like Chicken Little, squawking about how the sky is falling for reproductive rights in the U.S., it's been both inspiring and sustaining to have a sense of shared effort and community in this work. Abortion care is a human right. We hope this series can be part of the fight for that right. The Nocturnists Post-Roe America was created by me, Allie Block, and Emily Silverman. Our lead producer was Molly Rose Williams, and our producers were Sam Osborne and Jessica Young. John Oliver helped with the mixing, and Carly Besser assistant produced. Thanks to medical student producers Anjali Walia, Dahlia Kaki, Fiona Miller, and Milky Mahari, and pre-health intern Treya Tompkins. Our chief operating officer is Rebecca Groves. The series illustrations are by Nicole Zhu. The Nocturnist theme music is by Yosef Monroe, and all additional music comes from Blue Dot Sessions. The Nocturnist Post-Roe America series was made possible in part by the Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation. The Nocturnist is supported by the California Medical Association, a physician-led organization that works tirelessly to make sure that the doctor-patient relationship remains at the center of medicine. To learn more about the CMA, visit cmadocs.org. Our show is also made possible with donations from listeners like you. Thank you for supporting our work in storytelling. If you enjoy our show, please follow us in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. You can also help others find us by telling your friends and colleagues, posting this episode on social media, and leaving us a rating and review in your favorite podcast app. To contribute your voice to an upcoming project or to support our work with a donation, visit our website at thenocturnist.com. You can also find resources with more information about the state of abortion in the U.S., as well as ways to advocate and get involved at the series website. I'm your host, Allie Block. Thanks for listening.